Hello, and welcome to Politics and Prose Bookstore. My name is Sebastian. I'm an assistant events coordinator at Politics and Prose Bookstore, where we host a range of in-store events along with classes and trips. Before we get started today, I'd like to ask you to please silence your cell phones so not to disrupt the event. And when we get to the Q&A portion, please line up at the microphone to ask your questions. Also remind you there won't be any signing line tonight. Tonight, I'm very excited to welcome André Aciman, is the New York Times bestselling author of Call Me By Your Name, Out of Egypt, Eight White Nights, False Papers, Alibis, Harvard Square, Enigma Variations, and Find Me. He's the editor of the Prose Project and teaches comparative literature at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. He lives with his wife in Manhattan. He is joined today by Maria Arana. Maria Arana was born in Lima, Peru. She is the author of the memoir American Chica, a finalist for the National Book Award, two novels, Cellophane and Lima Nights, the prize-winning biography Bolivar, Silver Sword and Stone, a narrative story of Latin America, The Writing Life, a collection from her well-known column for the Washington Post, and her most recent work, Latino Land, a portrait of America's largest and least understood minority. She is the inaugural literary director of the Library of Congress and lives in Washington, D.C. and Lima, Peru. So please, an applause for them.
Hello, I see a few friends. Hello, hello, good evening. Andre, this is such a beautiful book.
Hi.
It's beautiful in every way. I mean, it's conception, it's construction, it's prose. Such a marvelous book. And what took you so long after Out of Egypt to come around to realizing that you needed to write something after the age of 15?
It's the kind of question that I ask myself all the time. Why did I wait 30 years to write a book that seemed so obviously meant to be written? In many ways, I have been writing about Rome for many, many years. I've been publishing many essays about Rome, my experience in Rome, my love for Rome, my this for Rome, my that. And I was doing it all the time. And eventually, I realized that one of the things that I didn't mention, and probably intentionally, is that when I got to Rome, I was extremely, and so was my family, extremely poor. We had lost everything in Egypt, and so there we are in Rome, also humiliated by the fact that we were poor. And so I said, this is what I need to write. I need to basically not obviate this, but put it out there. And that is, in fact, the beginning of the book is about how horrible it is to realize that you are poor when you didn't think that poverty was ever going to be your neighbor.
Well, yes, and the book is so resonant with the theme of loss, of losing your country, of losing your wealth, of losing your identity in so many ways. I think people still have trouble with your identity, Andre, because I'm reading in different places about you. If you go online, and it calls you Italian American, it calls you Egyptian American, they call you just about every French. You've been called just about, and what do you call yourself? How
Well,
do you identify
that's a
yourself?
very good question because I still haven't resolved that issue. Uh, I am. It's not that I am of everywhere and everything. No, I'm not. But my ancestors come from Spain 500 years ago. Okay, so they moved to Turkey and Italy, and they are part of the Sephardic community and still speak Ladino among themselves. So, okay, that's part. So I am Ladino, but I don't know Spanish. I don't know Ladino either. Okay. And I was born in Egypt, but I was never Egyptian. So what am I doing in Egypt? Well, my father had a business there, so that's fine. Okay. But I didn't, did I like being in Egypt? No. Did I like being in Italy? No. Did I like being in France? Absolutely not. Do I like America? Sort of. So where do I belong? Where is my home? I don't know. And that is the most honest thing I can say is I have no rooted anything. On the other hand, I do have a life. I do have a job. I do have a family. I do have a lot of those things that you consider real. But there's a side of me that questions everything. And that other side is the side that I write about because it is involved in the act of writing itself. The asking, who are you, for God's sake, is really an act of writing for me.
Yes, and I have to say, it really. I should have said this in the very beginning. It's such an honor to be here speaking with you, Andre, because I have admired your work for so long, all the way back to Out of Egypt, and you produced a whole flurry of books since then. But I think that what struck me about Out of Egypt, I mean, you didn't even mention Turkey.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, I
I mean, there's
forgot.
also
Okay.
Turkey, right?
Yes.
What I loved about that book was its sense of your discomfort with being Egyptian, and then at the end, a very loving tribute that you actually discovered how much you loved Alexandria, how much you and this book has the same echo. It is you're allergic to it. You don't like it. You don't like the area where you're living in Rome. Seems like such a dump to you. And when you go back and you see it with your children, it's inimical to everything you think you are. But then at the end, there is this great expression of love for Rome.
Yes. And somebody said this about me, and they said, oh, of course, it makes perfect sense. You only love things when you're about to lose them. And I say, yeah, that's probably correct, because that's the point in which you realize that, oh my God, I'm not going to be this person anymore. I'm not going to know this street any longer. This monument that I see every single day is not going to be part of my life any longer. How can that be? And when you think about it, just to extrapolate for a second, when somebody dies, you lose something. Somebody is no longer there for you. Not that they were there for you only, but as far as you're concerned, they're there for you. And when I was yesterday in Cambridge, and a very good friend of mine died a few years ago, burnt in his house because they had a fire. And so I still miss him. But at the same time, when I leave Cambridge, I stop thinking of him. So I'm an awful person, okay?
No, you're not. But there's also the thing, being an immigrant myself, having come to this country at the age of 9, almost 10, I know that there's this. So there is this sense of loss. You've lost. You're totally in a new environment, and you're trying to belong and trying to become that
Yes.
person that belongs in that environment. So you lose something, and then you go back. It's the going back that's really interesting to me because you're not that nobody feels you're that person anymore, and you are almost a stranger in your own land.
You're a stranger, yes. You were a stranger already, but you could camouflage that a bit. But when you go back, for example, when I go back to Cambridge, where I spent 8 years of my life there, uh, I feel like nobody knows me here. I'm basically a vagrant as far as they're concerned. So, and when I go back to Egypt, I went back to Egypt once, and I'll never go back again. I went there, and I felt like I'm a shadow. I'm not even a real person. I'm like a ghost. So you do feel that you lose your connection with the place, even if, as I like to say, that connection was flimsy to begin with. I don't think it was very solid. So, um, in many respects, I found that books helped me, novels helped me to ground myself in Rome since I was stuck there, and so I would read novels all the time. But at the same time, novels are a way of hiding from what it is that you're confronted with. And I knew I was hiding, and everybody told me. Even the barber said, "You're with a book again?" I'm supposed to cut your hair and you're going to be reading. People took an offense to this. So I was always hiding.
But you were observing also, and this is the thing that is so extraordinary about this book. This book is a marvel. It really is a wonderful, marvelous book. It is so filled with the place, the smells, um, the the people's relationships, the streets. I mean, it is so filled with every single bit that you must have been observing as that kid with your head in the books.
Yes. In fact, you do observe things it's like being in a room and you're listening to music or watching television, but you're still aware of what's going on around you. And I was reading all the time, but I was fully aware of the nonsense that was surrounding us, and I didn't like it. And I still don't like the street that I lived in, which is called Via Clelia. I didn't like it. I like the center of Rome, and there's a good reason for liking the center of Rome. I'm just skipping here, but because in a sense, I discovered Rome by accident. I would go from one bookstore to another bookstore to another bookstore looking for books because I was allowed to buy one book a week. And so here I am walking from it. And in the walking from one bookstore to another bookstore, you discover Rome. I realized that, God, this place is not so ugly. It's not so bad. I like the center of the city. I don't like the periphery because I lived on a very peripheral area, which I still hate. Now it's become gentrified. So you can't even fault it for being middle class, okay? Because nobody's poor any longer in Italy, I suppose, whatever. Of course, that's not true. But anyway,
I love the scene where you're going from one place to another. I think it's on a bus, and suddenly the Colosseum is in front
oh
of
yeah,
you. And you realize that you really are in Rome, that you are not in some sort of periphery. You really are in Rome, and it hits you. The beauty of it, the history of it, hits you all of a sudden.
yes. But at the same time, which is typical of me, and that's a nasty part of me, is that I say, okay, I've looked at the Colosseum. I could do another turn around by bus, but I can't because the bus is only going passing by it. I love the Colosseum. Okay, and this is the part that I think is signature me. I've seen it. Let's move on. Okay. Basically, I'm trying to deny the fact that it's too beautiful for me to ignore. I'm trying to ignore it. And I do the same thing in Paris. I'm in the Champs Elysees, and I'm saying to myself, okay, I've seen the Champs Elysees, big deal. Why do I deny this? Okay. And this is typical of me.
So, when people call you Italian
Oh,
American, as Wikipedia does, do you identify? Do you accept it? Do you accept it?
no, because they might as well say I'm Sicilian American, or I'm part of the soprano gang. I mean, you have no idea. Italian American, yeah, I have an Italian past, but it's not me. And if they call me French American or Egyptian American, I'm not. I'm none of those things. But then what am I? And I think that this is where to repeat myself, this is where the act of writing comes in. It is in finding out what the meaning of the word elsewhere is. And I'm an elsewhere person. I always belong elsewhere, but where is the other elsewhere? Where is that other place? I don't know where it is. I'm still looking for it, and I probably will die and never find it.
Maybe with your brother.
Uh, what?
Is that home? I mean, I feel that way because the only people who have experienced what I've
Oh,
experienced to some degree, because they're very different people, but to some degree, my home is really with those siblings who
yes.
came with me.
Let me ask you a question. Do they tell you, as my brother would always tell me, you're romanticizing too much? In other words, you're just being literary. And and I hate that because yes, on one hand I am being sort of literary. On the other hand, I'm trying to tell them, do you remember so and so? No. I always ask him if he remembers something, and he always says, you remember too much. And I said, yeah,
As if it's a curse.
yes, and it might be a curse.
Well, I want to ask you how you feel, since we're on the subject of immigrants, about the grumpiness of Americans
Oh,
against immigrants at this moment in time.
it is, I think it's unfortunate because I'm an immigrant. And I think that many of the people who are anti immigrant are themselves, and I'm not going to name names, but they are themselves the children of immigrants. And so, what happened? Do you not see that you have been an immigrant too, and that you have immigration in your blood? And who is not an immigrant in America? I mean, unless you go back many, many generations and you can name the ship or the boat that they came in,
Or the tribe.
of the tribe. Yes, thank you. Yes, very. And there are lots of ways of finding out. Most people are, in fact, immigrants, and I think that everybody, as far as I'm concerned, also is not quite rooted as they think they are. Everybody has an elsewhere in their blood that they're looking for or trying to settle or come to a reckoning with. Because everybody, and I think the best example I have is how many of you have visited, I'm just asking a question, have visited your second grade homeroom? Nobody has. Okay. You see, uh, that means that you are very rooted. I always go to the place, and I want my children to go to where they went to school because I want them to say, oh my God, time has passed. I used to go here all day long and I hated it or I loved it, whatever. But there is always that sense that you are in contact with something that is flimsy and is not secure, and that is me. And that is, I mean, that's my history. I exaggerated because I have obvious sort of not belongingness in my blood, and it becomes obvious to me. But many people, I think, are also equally tormented by something that does not feel right.
Rootless. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's very true. Now, let's talk about this marvel that I'm holding here, and what it entails. I mean, this is a story of a year.
Yes.
It's a story of a year. It's a story of a very extraordinary year in the life of a young man, young boy. You're probably about 15 years old in this
16. Yeah.
16. So you're on the cusp. I mean, this is what's so incredible about reading this memoir because there's so much on the cusp about it. You are on the cusp of manhood,
Yes.
right? You are on the cusp of a new place because you've moved from Alexandria to Rome. It's a very, very different place. You're on the cusp of meeting family you've never met before, Uncle Claude, and you're in transition,
Yes.
and you're even in transition in your sexuality a bit because you don't. There are moments when you don't know what gender to be attracted to,
Yeah.
and it's this is all, the wonder I think of this book is that we've all been there in some way or shape where you are just the a sort of beginning fully expressed human being,
Yeah.
and that is what this book is about. It's about your sort of molting into the man that you are today.
True. It is very true. And it is about essentially not knowing, because you, at that age, you're very confused, more confused than people admit. You're confused about who you are. You're confused about your identity. You're confused about your sexuality. You don't know if you're going to go this way or that way or both ways. Or some days you're this, some days you're that. You don't know if you're, and the other one that is, of course, signal in my life has been, am I really Jewish? Do I want to be Jewish? In other words, because I never believed in anything and I never practiced religion. So I was lucky that way because the God thing never existed for me. So that was taken care of. But at the same time, what nationality am I? I don't know. I don't know the religion. I don't know the sexuality. I don't know anything. I don't know who I like. Do I like my mother? There is a scene in which I tell my brother, and my brother tells me, you know, mom should die. And if you think about it, yeah, how many of us have wished this temporarily on somebody that we love and we care for a lot? She should die. Yes, I think you're right. It's a horrible thing, but in essence, you're confused about everything. And I wanted to capture that moment as well. You're not rich anymore, but you still have the values of a rich person, but you're poor, and you have to accept being poor. Um, all these things are very confusing, and I don't know if I resolved any of it, and I don't think I can.
I think that's the beauty of the book is that we're hanging in that sort of nether world of not knowing
Yeah.
who we are through you. And when I say knowing who we are through you, I really feel that this is, my husband, Jonathan Yardley, reviewed your first book,
Yeah.
Out of Egypt. And he said, this is a beguiling book. And that word sticks with me because you are a beguiling writer. And by beguiling, beguiling, what does beguiling mean? It means enchanting. It means that you're under a spell. And that is what you do. I mean, this thing is like a Scheherazade of sorts. I mean, we're going into you bring us deeper and deeper into these personalities, and at first you don't. I ended up really loving Uncle Claude. I ended up really loving your father,
Yeah.
and you have doubts about him at first. I mean, you're not entirely certain about whether how you feel about your mother or your father, and by the end you are you have beguiled us, you have enchanted us into the personality, the life of your father.
Yes, because my father, it's a known fact, I said it in Out of Egypt, used to basically cheat on my mother all the time. That was a fait accompli. We knew this. Everybody knew it. Everybody in Alexandria knew it. So it was no secret. And my mother knew it. And she didn't like it at all. Uh, and
Who's going to like it?
no, no, but she hated. They fought every single day until they died. Okay, they fought all the time. But the real issue was that where was I going? I was trying to
About
pick
your father.
about my father. Sorry, my father was a a person who essentially made me not like him because he was cheating on my mother and I sided with her. Then I heard his side of the story, and I said, "Oh my God, yeah, I would cheat on her too." And then I heard her side, which was he cheats on me. I said, "Yeah, that's terrible." So I couldn't even decide which of the two I was on the side of. I couldn't, and But this is typical of me. I don't know any side. I cannot take any side. Everything
But
is
you put us in that position too, because
yeah.
you make us realize just by describing them so exactly, it seems, that these people should never be together. I mean, whatever brought them together is, by the end of this story,
Yeah.
we know them so well.
Yeah, you do know them. And I've asked myself that question. And I asked my father, I said, "What made you marry my mother?" She says, "I don't know."
And they lived in different cities. He went to live in Paris,
Yes,
and your mother, of course, with you in Rome.
yes.
So tell us, because also you say the elsewhere person. You were very hesitant to describe yourself or identify yourself as Jewish in Rome, and
Yes.
you were very careful not to, and you didn't want anybody to know it. And of course, that was because I don't know, but because you had been expelled from Alexandria, from Egypt, for being
Jewish.
Jewish.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. Set the stage a little bit about that.
Well, essentially, you arrive in Italy and you expect that this is a Catholic country, and so everybody's going to hate Jews. Actually, the Italians were fantastic to me. They never showed any anti Semitism at all. Whether they hid it very well or not is another question. but I never felt it. So at some point, I couldn't go to the American school because it was too expensive. But they said, why don't you try this other school, which is called Notre Dame International? And Notre Dame or Notre Dame was a Catholic school. And so I said, "Oh my God, I'm going to go to a Catholic school. They're going to be horrible to us, and basically we're Jewish, and they'll know it." And in fact, it turned out that I told the person interviewing me, "We're being expelled from Egypt. We're Jewish, and my mother is deaf." And because she was there at the and suddenly I felt totally liberated. I had said something that I had never said before, that she was deaf, that we were Jewish. And that freed me for a while of the shame of being expelled, of the shame of being Jewish in a country where Jews were hated, and of course of having a mother who could not hear at all.
It's really extraordinary. I was just checking to see what the Jewish population in Alexandria is, and it seems that there are 12 Jews.
No,
In,
that's too many. It is. Literally, it's 12. It's not 12 at all. There's like three, and they're all dying.
An amazing story of the expulsion from Egypt. So, did you, when you were writing this book, which actually takes up after the expulsion
Right.
from Egypt, were you very aware of out of Egypt as you were writing this? Did you feel like you had to knit back at all?
No, I didn't. I just got, because that's how I treat my books. I just go and I have no idea when it's going to end, and I don't know where I'm going. I just have certain episodes I want to tell you about, and that's it. Otherwise, I just, I don't look back. I don't try to find coherence between what I said in Out of Egypt. For example, in Out of Egypt, I have no brother because an editor said to me, there are too many kids in this book. I said, okay, you want me to suppress one? I can't suppress myself. He said, well, kill your brother. Okay, I said, fine. So we just removed him from the book. But this time, I said, come on, I can't do that again. And she felt, she's no longer my editor, but she said, you can never do that again. You should not have listen to me. But so now he's back in, and he is the person who basically is very attuned to Rome. He makes friends everywhere. He is sort of very social. And at the same time, he's constantly saying, you're reading too many books. What are you doing with the books? It's a nice day outside. I'm staying in. I mean, I can just, he hated my bookishness.
You know, what's remarkable too, when you read a memoir like this, of course, you're fishing around, seeing where all the novels came from.
Oh,
And I definitely had a feeling that there was a little root of Call Me By Your Name here. I felt there was a little root of just about every single novel that you've written, and that it's all sort of. I mean, this is like the black box of your fiction. Would you say?
yes, I think it is. And you would find everything I've written is in there, just as everything I've written is in every other book as well, because I essentially I've got this personality which is confused, and I project it on all my characters, at least the characters that I understand. There are some characters that I do not understand, and one of them is Oliver. For those of you who know who he is, I don't understand at all a person like Oliver.
Yeah, hard to understand.
Yes.
But enchanting and beguiling also. So.
In a way, yes.
Would you, Andre? Would you? What I love also about this book is it's so granular in its recollections. I mean, you remember everything. You remember exactly when you went, from this street to that street. You remember the taste of things. Oh my goodness, when you discover bergamot, is just astonishing. And so, would you read a little bit? Because I want them to get a little flavor of how wonderful your descriptions can be.
Um, I'm trying to decide what to read. Do you have 5 minutes? Is that okay? Okay, let me just.
Meanwhile, I would like you to think about questions you would like to ask Andre, because we're getting near that. point.
You think I would find this passage? Yeah. I'm in an American school, and in an American school, the teacher is teaching Zorba the Greek. And to make things funny and interesting for the students, he decides to play the record of the movie. I don't know how many of you have seen the movie. I'm not asking because I don't want to know. Okay. We heard a few scratches, then a series of slow introductory pluckings of the bouzouki, which I recognized right away. Then, after the introduction, came the first stirrings of Zorba's dance, eventually erupting at greater and greater speed till it lashed into a vertiginous tune that reminded me that Greek music was in my blood, had always been, and that all you had to do was scratch the surface and you'd find me no less passionate than any Zorba. This was my world, tugging at me, calling me back, reminding me of intimate moments in Alexandria and before of my beguiling Constantinople, which I'd never seen, but where they said my soul was still rooted there. Just then, something totally unexpected happened to me. I stared at the blackboard, at the teacher, at the rest of the silent class of American students, by the way, realizing that no one in this classroom could possibly understand this music. My head, my neck, and my shoulders began to shake, both to the music but also to something like a protest welling up within me, except that I was as tired, I was as I tried to smother my reaction, my body shook, and then tears began to stream down my cheeks, though I wasn't sobbing. These were silent, muffled, bashful tears whose flow I couldn't hold back, and rather than fool myself into thinking that I was reacting to the strains of the music only, I could tell that something else was taking place, something unremembered and yet so cloistered and far away. The music remembered my grandmother, the way it remembered the sound of her slippers in Egypt when she shuffled from the kitchen to my bedroom with a glass of orange juice she'd squeezed and, after knocking at my door, mispronounced three words that sounded more German than English and were rise and shine, she'd say, rise and shine. The more I tried not to heed what the music was summoning, sorry, the more it wanted me to recall even Aunt Elsa and her jams. And all this took me back to a world so bygone and lost when confronted with these up and coming, latter day, firmly grounded Americans who were sitting with me in the same classroom, who thought American, lived American, sang American, and whose life course seemed so clearly traced for them, while mine was totally uncharted. I thought of people who become hoarders to stop the world from changing once it had spun around them too many times. A small, tawdry thing can become a refuge and a wellspring of trust. Last paragraph. Maybe the music was a roundabout call from my Greek past, from the Greeks who spoke to me in Greek and had once made me think I was no less Greek than they were, but whose tongue I was fast forgetting, the way within a few months in Rome I had started to forget Arabic as well. As I listened to the music in class, I recalled the Greek grocer who didn't want to go back to a homeland in Greece he'd never seen or cared to see. But then, is Egypt my home? He would ask my mother. He shook his head to make her see that the answer could only be no.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
The memories are so impressive in this book, Andre. And I just wonder, as a writer, I wonder, did you keep a journal? Are these just, does this come back to you in visual, sort of filmic narratives, or what prompts your memory? For me, I've that story about the bergamot really resonated with me because for me, I grew up on a sugar plantation, and the smells are prompt memory for me. I mean, smells are very, I don't know, they're just connected to my memory brain. And just a sudden scent can send me back with great detail.
Yes.
Tell us about your sense of memory.
My sense of memory is that once you start writing, you go into that little hovel of yours, and you enter a zone that where you remember things that you had never remembered before. In other words, you force yourself to recall things, and you recall sort of the door. How did it squeak when it opened? What kind of sound did the latch make when you opened it, when you unlocked the door? These kinds of things you wouldn't think about until you're writing about them. But then once you start writing about them, you begin to expand, and they become louder and louder, and you begin to see more things. And I think that's what the act of writing does. Somebody once asked me, what is your Madeleine? Referring to the kind of thing that summons up the memory of things. And I said,
Proust's Madeleine.
Bruce Madeleine, yes. For those of you who don't know. Okay. Um, the the fact is that for me it's watermelon, because in Rome, when you walked in the summer and it was very hot, you would buy a slice of watermelon. It's usually like a V-shaped thing, a triangle of watermelon. It's not big at all. In fact, you could use two if you had the money. But they also lend you a knife for you to remove the pits. And you leave the pits on the floor, of course. But that taste of watermelon for me immediately brings Rome to me, even today. If I have watermelon, I'm in Rome.
It's so funny. I don't know why you reminded me of this, but um, back when I was a child, my aunt always used to put cellophane on her toes before she put on her nylons so that her toenails wouldn't run
Yes.
the nylons. And that sound of the cellophane, whenever she walked, there was a crinkle, crinkle, and it just brings back that human being, my aunt. It just brings back her whole personality that she would do that, and that she would, if you were sleeping next to her as a child, she would put the blanket so that you wouldn't touch. And all of this, that comes back when you think of this, just the sound of that cellophane
Yeah.
sets it off.
And if you have a sister, I don't know if your sister is the same as my brother, they don't want to think about those things. They're thinking of things in today's world.
I
And
have a few siblings.
yeah,
like
and
that.
you basically are pulling them into an area that they're not interested in. And so you have to put up with that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank God you remember everything that you do, Andre, because the books are marvelous. Are there questions? We are just in time for a few questions. There's a microphone over here. Please, if you can't make it to the microphone, we'll try to hear you, but it will be so much better if you do, particularly since this is being live streamed.
I hate
Could
to,
you identify yourself?
yeah,
before
yeah,
you-
yeah. My name's Reed. I hate to ask you what your advice is for young writers, so I'll think of a better way of getting to that same sort of question. I'm in an MFA program, and when I look back at your novels, I think, what would André Aciman think of this sort of thing? An MFA program where we're thinking of tricks and ways to write our books. And I guess I wonder, what do you make of how writers are trying to emerge these days with MFA programs and all of these craft books? Do you think you would have written the same books had you been in that environment? Do you
No.
think? And I guess my real question is, what sort of advice would you give to us young writers who look to books like yours and hope to write something similar, or something as heartfelt and authentic, um, and who are navigating
Sure.
this new world for writers?
There is one advice I've been giving for many years now, and it's the same advice, but it makes total sense to me. Uh, the beginning of it is very simple. Instead of putting a period at the end of a sentence, put a comma. The reason for that is that it compels you to examine something that you thought was closed. And if you examine this thing that you thought was closed and it's now being sort of summoned up, now you can go after it, something that you never knew was going to be said. And essentially you're writing a longer sentence. And a longer sentence means that you're capturing more things, more fish in the net than just that one thing. So if your example is Hemingway, please disregard that and try to understand that there are other writers who like to enter into themselves by not putting a period. Go just put a comma or put a double an M dash just so that you can keep going.
That's so funny that you said Hemingway, Andre, because it was Hemingway who his advice was when you stop writing for the day, stop mid sentence, and then on the next day you'll pick it right up. So uh, he could channel your advice.
He could use it too.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
You're
Thank
welcome.
I love the word that you used, heartfelt, because I think that everything you write is deeply heartfelt.
I hope so. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
Indeed.
Hello, I'm Bill. So, Mr. Osman, you said your signature is confusion that you don't know. I want to ask, what are you not confused about? What do you know?
Oh, now you're asking
That's
me
a great
an
question, my
impossible
goodness.
question.
What do you know?
I know nothing. I mean, I'm the first person to say to in public, and now I'm on YouTube or whatever it is, that I know nothing at all. I'm always wrong, and if I think I'm right, I'm reminded by the people in my immediate family that I'm wrong. In other words, I'm always wrong, and if I think I am totally sure of being correct, in the afternoon of that same day, I will reconsider and say, possibly I was wrong. And so there's nothing that I believe is concrete in my life. And probably I don't want it to be.
It's a very philosophical question, and that's a very philosophical answer. I don't know where that leaves us. I think you know quite a bit about the human heart
Yes.
to connect those two questions.
Well, the human heart is really fundamentally filled with contradiction, and that's my life. It's filled with paradox. It doesn't make sense, which is why when I discovered the work of Pessoa, I find that, oh my God, nothing makes sense to him. And when he says, I don't make sense, he says, I know I don't make sense when I say I don't make sense. So basically, he's on a different level of intimacy with the reader and intimacy with himself. And I like not knowing. I don't want to know things.
It seems like almost Ayurvedic or Buddhist sort of position where you really are. That makes you a curious person, though, not knowing.
Oh, yes.
And
Yes.
and so you're always open, which convinces me that your incredible memory and your incredible ability to reconstruct moments in time probably comes from that same feeling somehow connected. Now you're making us all philosophical here. Are there more questions?
Hello.
Hi.
Um, you speak about intimacy, and if there's one of the key things that I appreciate so much about your writing is your ability to paint these portraits of intimacy and to become so intimate with your readers. That's a very vulnerable task. How do you get into is it ever challenging to get into that place as a writer to become so vulnerable and to become so intimate in your work?
It's a good question.
Great question.
One of the things that I try to do is I don't think I ever have said anything about intimacy and the connection between one human being and another human being that I didn't feel was universal. Because if anything that is twisted in me, and sick and twisted, I mean, is fundamentally universal. And that's why I put it out there. I would never put something out there that I felt is only true about me. But the things I've said about me are sort of generic at this point. Everybody knows them. And they're in this book as well, where, I mean, you don't say to somebody like your Uncle Claude, you don't say, I want to go and spit on your grave when you die. okay, which I said in the book. In other words, these are horrible things, but how many of us have thought similar things? And I think that when it comes to intimacy between human beings, you have to go all the way in. Otherwise, don't even bother. You have to examine the contradictions that exist in a human being. You sleep with somebody, and then you say, God, this was a huge mistake. And then you say, no, it was not a mistake. And you realize that you could actually be in love with this person. How did you go from one to the other to the other? You know, and that's what basically I love going into those areas.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you for
welcome.
the question. Yeah, I think I've read some critics say about your work that you go places where other writers don't go or won't go. And you must have read that about uh, the writing about your work. And how does that make you feel?
I like it.
Yeah.
No, I like when people say, God, he's very bold, because people have said to me, you're amazingly bold, and yet I'm always very polite. My prose is always grammatical. I hope it is. Everything is polished to it, but I'm really sick and twisted, okay? Uh, but and you can see it, it's there. And so, I mean, let's take a scene that is canonical at this point. It's the peach scene. The peach scene is essentially
This is the
something.
peach scene in Call Me by
Oh, you
Your
don't
Name.
know what the peach scene is? Seriously?
Just in case you're wondering.
Everybody knows that. But the question is, you know, you have that scene in the book, and I was going to suppress this because I said, that is too much. And somebody said, no, absolutely keep it. And how did I go there? What made me go there? I will never understand that. But I did go there, and I'm glad I did.
Oh, of course. But you know, you're not any sicker or more twisted. You just said this than any of the rest of us sitting right here.
I think so.
So
I think so.
we understand the peach scene completely.
Okay.
So I want to ask, and please think of some more questions because your questions are really good. They're very good. Um, I want to ask how you think your mother or your father or your Aunt Flora or your Uncle Claude would feel about reading about themselves in this book.
I think my parents would have been okay with it. They were, because I was honest, and they were not people to be dishonest about themselves. Uncle Claude, I don't know. He's so the one that I said I was going to spit on his grave, and I don't know where he's buried, so I don't know yet what to do. But he is. That is one. But Aunt Flora is for me my favorite character because she is very much like me, but not me. And she's a character who basically is fantastic, wise to a point of no end, and has an understanding of who it is that I am. She says, you're going to go to America and they will change you there. Do you think I want that? And who wants me to remain who I am? I don't, but she wanted me to stay who I was. And that was for me a big compliment. And I wanted to put that in the book.
It was clearly pure love that she had for
Yes.
you. Your father is also such a wonderful character, too, a real person. Excuse me, just while I say this. Um, that he loved books.
Yes.
He did not live in a world of books, but he made a world of books for himself.
Yes. And he essentially he was the person who gave me the love of books. And he is the one who bought me the first volume of Proust. You know, he said, you should read this, you might like it. Forget the fact that I was lying to another couple, and when I met them, and they said, "What? Who do you love?" I said, "Oh, I love Proust," and I was just quoting my father. Okay, I had never read a word of Proust, but I'm known to do that. Okay, uh, nevertheless, there was a sense that my father was a very well read, who had fantastic taste in books. He hated certain authors that I have gone to hate as well, and there, he loved certain others that I've basically been lured into loving as well.
He was a fantastic figure in your life. Please, your question.
Hi, my name is Jessica.
Hi.
When you were talking about living on the outskirts of Rome, it definitely made me think of La Haine and living in the banlieue. What would you say are your influences? And I might be, you know, saying something for you, but your version of masculinity seems, you know, in all of your books seems quite different from the masculinity that we see in something like La Haine or something where there are people that are on the outskirts or they're othered. What would you say are your influences that led you to have, you know, a different expression of masculinity or a different expression for yourself other than that kind of machismo that we see in something like La Haine?
Well, machismo you're not going to get from me, okay?
For those who couldn't quite hear, the question is about masculinity. What has influenced you, and where did you get that notion of masculinity?
Well, I think that I wouldn't be exaggerating if I said that every virile male is also a woman in disguise, and every woman is, in fact, also a man in disguise. Not disguise intentional, but basically it's there. And not to know this and not to realize it and to say, no, I am just this and not that, just doesn't make sense. It's a waste of time and it's a waste of psychological energy. You might as well accept the fact that you are, for men especially, who have a problem. You know, men don't cry. You know, and so some of my men do cry in novels, and they get emotional. Men do not get emotional. That sort of thing. You're mentioning Luis, correct?
Mhm.
Yes, I didn't like that book, so that's my own take. Um, but that's totally a different thing. So
Yeah. Thank you.
Do you think that it's where in this world is there a sense, do you think, that of what you say, that people don't realize that they have the man in them or the woman in them? Is there a place in the world where there is a kind of um,
no,
sense of that?
no, I don't think it exists, and maybe it doesn't exist except in certain cities in America, and you certainly won't find them in the South. But it is a fact of life that we are all sort of binary, at least binary, or trinary, or quadruple, or whatever. We are many, many people inside of us. We are like what I call sort of the Vayatka dolls. You know, we are like those Russian dolls that are. There's, oh God, there's a woman in me. Oh, there's a man in me. Oh, that's a child. And I always tell people, and this goes back to your question about writing, is that you should always listen to the child in you who is 7 years old and who understands books better than you do. Because his reaction is exactly the reaction you want. And I tell this to my graduate students when they are writing a dissertation. I say, don't give me the hogwash of jargon. Tell me what it is that the child in you reacted. And if you cannot tell me, go find that child, because the child is actually quite correct in most things.
That's really beautiful, and it reminds me of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who said, Anything that you need to know to be a writer, you knew at
Yes.
the age of 8."
Okay, so I'm
Oh, you're off
I'm
by a year.
7. Okay.
Please.
Hi, good evening. Sorry, I'm still formulating my question. Thank you for talking about elsewhere, because that's something in your writing that I've always really identified with. And I think it might be an essay in Alibis that you write about when you travel somewhere,
Yes.
you're not looking for the new, you're looking for home or looking to find. And I remember when I read that, I was like, this is what I do. And I've like tried to have these conversations with friends, and nobody in today's society seems to feel that way. They always are looking for the new. You're traveling right now. I know you don't spend a lot of time places, but is there anything here in DC or recently on this tour that you've been traveling that you've seen that has reminded you of home, maybe in Rome or Alexandria or anywhere that might be home?
In DC, Absolutely not.
So I thought I was.
No, but put it this way: when I was in Manchester, I was in Manchester last week. Manchester, of all cities, is an ugly town, but it had areas that say I could say, "Oh my God, this is almost like Alexandria." Somehow, there were moments when I could say, but to be honest with you, I go back. I go when I travel with my wife. She is looking for things that are new for whatever. And I'm looking for not only the old, but I'm looking for a possible home. Okay. And she says, "What are you looking for a home for? You have a home and it's in New York. You don't understand. I'm confused."
I want to ask, thank you. I want to ask, you have 3 sons.
Yes.
And do they feel the same way that you do, or are they really sort of rooted Americans?
Yes and no. The yes is because they're born in America. They've gone to American schools and American colleges and universities, and so they are very American. But what I did, which is basically my legacy to them, if you want to call it that, is that I told them to hone a sense of irony about many things. And irony is a way not just of seeking the funny moments in life, but also to find that discord exists in everything you do and look for it and prize it as opposed to ignore it. So they're constantly aware of the ironic structure of life. And that is my gift to them, or it's my curse. I don't know.
You were raised with so many languages. From the beginning of this book, you already are speaking English, you're speaking French, you're learning Italian, and you speak Arabic
Yes.
as well. Ladino a little bit in your family.
Yes.
Yes. So you already, at the age of 15, 16, already have a command of these languages. How do you think that that altered the person you are, the writer that you are?
I don't know. And I don't know what language I dream in. I don't know. I think that having so many languages and so many cultures ultimately confuses me. It does not make me a better writer, it makes me a more confused writer. In other words, I have to resolve many things. There are notes. I usually, when I take a subway or a bus, I'll take a notebook with me and write down notes. Usually, I write them in Italian or in French, not seldom in English. And then I go back home and I take those notes and I put them in English now. And basically, I feel that that is cheating on the experience. But at the same time, it highlights the fact that, yeah, I can go from one language to the other. It's not that they make me better writer. It's just that I'm more confused because I can't resolve anything.
Well, you say at one point that you are in this book. You say, "I would never pretend to write in French or in Italian."
Yeah.
So these are not writing languages for you; they're note-taking languages for
Yes.
you. But then, but there's an echo.
Yes.
There is an echo of the French and the Italian in what you write.
There is, yes, because you can spot, in fact, in my writing, you can spot that this is not an American person writing, but he's not a native English speaker, but he's not a Frenchman, he's not an Italian. There's something weird going on, and sometimes I highlight the weirdness because I like to do that, and sometimes I try to be very American and lapidary. The dog bit the postman. I like that. I like the
It works
factuality of it.
sometimes. Yeah.
It does. So I can do that. I can move from one to the other, but I'm moving from one culture to another culture more than from one language to another language.
Well, André Aciman, you have given us such riches, and it's so wonderful to see in this memoir where those riches. I mean, I do think that this is like the Bible, the code for who André Aciman is and all the riches that he has given us. Please give a very big thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marie.